Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're stepping into an older kind of knowledge, the quiet world of timber framing, where oak beams, wooden pegs, and patient hands shaped homes that have stood for centuries. You're a master carpenter drifting through a workshop of sawdust, shavings, and slow, thoughtful labour. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You find yourself standing beside a stack of rough oak logs at dawn, the air cool and unhurried, as if even the morning is reluctant to break its own silence. The forest behind you seems half awake, its branches holding the last traces of night. A few birds shift sleepily in the canopy, not yet ready to declare the new day. You breathe in the scent of damp bark and turned soil, rich and woody, a smell that settles deep in the chest and feels older than memory. Timber framing does not begin with the raising of beams or the carving of joints. It begins in this sort of quiet, with a sense that you're stepping into a conversation the world has been having long before you arrived. The logs rest on the ground like heavy, patient animals, still carrying the roughness of their former lives. Oak especially has a way of looking like it remembers things. Storms, harsh winters, the weight of its own branches. You rest your hand on the nearest trunk, feeling the coarse ridges of bark, cracked like dry riverbeds. The wood is cold, firm, and strangely reassuring. It lies still, yet there's a calm vitality beneath the surface, as if the tree hasn't quite stopped being itself. That steady presence is what makes timber frames survive centuries. The wood does not rush, does not resist, does not pretend to be something it isn't. It simply exists in its own slow language. The sky lightens by degrees, not in any hurry. You can almost hear the faint shifting of shadows as dawn decides where to settle. The first thin beams of sunlight graze the logs, turning the lingering dew into pinpoints of gold. You watch droplets slide down the bark, making dark streaks that vanish as quickly as they appear. Everything around you is in motion, but so gently that it feels like stillness. You inhale again, deeper this time, letting the morning air fill your lungs and loosen your shoulders. There is no pressure here. No one demands speed or perfection. Even the work ahead waits quietly, knowing it can only begin when your hands and mind are steady. Craftsmen have stood like this for centuries, letting themselves settle before the day begins. Some would whisper a prayer. Others would scratch thoughtfully at their beards. Many simply listened, to wind through leaves to birds, to their own breath. You stand the same way now, letting the world come into focus, grain by grain. A soft crunch of soil under your boots reminds you that you are not in a workshop yet, not among tools or timbers squared into obedience. You're still in the place where the materials remember being trees, and you are just a visitor, borrowing their strength. The logs carry a certain dignity, rough and imperfect, but full of possibilities. The first cut is still far away, and there is comfort in that waiting. The work will demand attention and muscle soon enough, but for now it is simply you, the weight of the wood, and the gentle insistence of the morning. A faint breeze passes through the clearing, bringing with it the leafy whisper of oaks and beeches still rooted in the earth. The sound is soft, almost like distant conversation. You turn slightly toward it, sensing the forest's calm approval. Woodworkers have always been aware, even if they rarely said it aloud, that timber is not merely material. It is memory, shaped by sun and rain and slow seasons. You imagine a medieval carpenter standing where you stand now, maybe 500 years ago, brushing frost from his sleeves and squinting at a row of newly felled logs. He would feel the same mix of anticipation and humility. He would know instinctively, that the house begins here, where the world is quiet enough to teach patience. Your fingers trace a long groove in the bark, catching on small ridges and flakes. The texture is unrefined and earnest. There is no smoothness yet, none of the clean lines or satisfying edges that beams will eventually carry. Even so, you sense the future shape hidden inside, the sturdy heart that will carry floors, the straight grain that will hold pegs, the subtle twist that may require a little persuasion. You're not judging anything, you're just learning its temperament. Wood has moods, and oak especially holds them with stubborn poetry. A small chip of bark breaks free under your thumb, falling into your palm like a curled flake of brown parchment. You turn it over, amused at how light it is compared to the massive log it once belonged to. The forest is generous with reminders that everything strong has delicate parts. You brush the chip away and rest your hand flat against the surface again, letting the coolness seep into your skin. The oak does not rush to warm, it has its own pace. Somewhere behind you, a distant stream murmurs lazily over stones, the sound trickling into the edges of your awareness. It pairs naturally with the faint rustle of branches overhead, forming an unhurried rhythm that your breathing begins to match. This is the pace that timber framing asks for. Unforced, attentive, content with the simple act of noticing. Before any cut, before any tool is lifted, this rhythm must settle in your hands. Without it, the work resists. With it, even the heaviest beam feels willing. You step closer to the stack, observing how the logs rest against one another like oversized chords waiting to be tuned. Some still carry bits of moss clinging to their undersides. Others show pale streaks where the bark snapped away during felling. The ends reveal tight, even rings, each marking a year of slow persistence. You follow the circles with your eyes, spiraling inward toward the dense heartwood. There's something reassuring about how orderly nature is when left alone. Craftsmen learned from these rings, not through books, but through years of touching, listening, cutting, correcting, and sometimes sighing with quiet amusement when a beam didn't behave as expected. A crow calls out from deep in the forest, its voice echoing once before fading into a more distant caw. The sound folds into the silence rather than interrupting it. You lift your head slightly, aware of how much space surrounds you. The clearing feels wide but safe, held gently by the encircling branches of the woodland. Somewhere, a rabbit scampers through underbrush, though you only hear it, a soft shuffle, a quick scratch of leaves. Life continues in small, comfortable motions all around you. It's easy to see why old carpenters often escaped their busy villages at dawn, preferring the quiet honesty of the forest. Your breath comes out in a steady exhale, clouding faintly in the cool air. The logs wait without judgment, without urgency. They've already waited decades to grow, weeks to dry, days to rest here. They can wait a little longer for your hands to awaken. There is a gentle humour in that, how the strongest houses begin with a carpenter humbly acknowledging that wood has all the time in the world. You smile to yourself, silently amused by how often you have tried to hurry something that refuses to be hurried. A ray of sunlight finally breaks through the canopy, landing across your forearm with soft warmth. The light crawls gradually up the bark, revealing subtle shifts in colour, deep browns, hints of amber, traces of grey where lichen once clung. You take in the moment without trying to capture it, letting the warmth blend with the morning chill. This balance, warmth against cold, stillness against possibility, is where the story of every timber-framed home quietly begins. You adjust your stance, grounding your feet more firmly in the soil. The forest floor gives slightly beneath you, softened by layers of old leaves. That faint yielding tells you something important, that even the earth is patient with builders. A house, no matter how sturdy, must sit on ground that understands waiting. You glance again at the logs, and a small realization settles comfortably in your mind. Before the tools, Before the noise of mallets and saws, before the shaping and fitting and raising, there is something far simpler, a moment like this where you stand still enough to sense the wood's history. A house that will stand for centuries begins with you listening, not working. The air shifts again, gentle and cool, brushing past your cheek like a quiet encouragement. You rest your hand once more on the oak, letting your fingers settle into the grooves of the bark. You feel no urgency to move. The day will unfold at its own pace. For now, there is just this moment. You, the whispering forest, and the silent companionship of the timber waiting to become something more. You walk into the forest while the morning is still young enough to carry its own silence. That tender hush that seems to belong only to places where people have not yet made demands. The mist clings low to the ground, curling around the bases of tall oaks like a careful greeting. Your boots sink slightly into soft earth, each step muffled by fallen leaves that have given up their crispness to the damp. Ahead of you, the trees rise in quiet procession, their trunks straight, their crowns overlapping like the vaulted ceiling of a cathedral built entirely by wind and time. You pause beside the first oak that draws your attention. Its trunk is thick, almost imperceptibly tapered, as though the tree has learned through decades of storms that modesty in shape brings endurance. The bark is deep and furrowed, a labyrinth of ridges and shadows. You place your palm against it, feeling the faint coolness seep into your skin. The surface is rough, but there's a certain comfort in that texture, a sincerity that smooth wood simply cannot offer until years of work have been done. There was a time when craftsmen walked as you do now, without measuring tapes or technical diagrams, relying instead on an inherited sense of what a tree could become. They watched for the subtle lean of a trunk, the twist suggested by a certain pattern in the bark, the faint bulge where knots waited unseen. You try to look with those same eyes, letting the tree reveal more of itself the longer you stand before it. The mist shifts slightly, stirred by a breeze that makes the high branches murmur. Leaves tremble overhead, their motion soft and unhurried, like gestures made by someone too sleepy to rush. You tilt your head, listening to the faint creak of limbs adjusting. Some carpenters used to say they could hear when a tree was straight, though perhaps that was more poetry than method. Still, you find yourself listening anyway, letting the sounds of wood and wind speak in their own quiet dialect. You move on, weaving through the undergrowth. Ferns brush your boots, bending delicately, then righting themselves with the dignity of things accustomed to being ignored. The oaks grow denser here, their trunks rising in patient parallel. You glance at each one, appreciating the individuality hidden inside their shared form. Some trees stand with the confidence of old kings. Others lean modestly to one side, shaped by seasons of uneven sunlight. Each carries a history only partly visible from the outside. You stop beside another oak, slimmer but beautifully straight. Its bark is lighter, slightly cracked but evenly so, like a map drawn by a precise but absent-minded cartographer. You tap the trunk gently with your knuckles. The sound is hollow in a sturdy way, deep and resonant. There is something deeply satisfying about that muted thump, a sound that has guided countless carpenters toward exactly the right tree. You run your fingers along the grain visible under the bark, sensing the direction it has grown, the gentle spiraling that hints at how the wood might behave once cut. It is like reading a biography written without words, a record of years spent reaching upward with deliberate steadiness. A patch of sunlight filters through the canopy, landing on a cluster of leaves that glisten faintly with droplets. You watch the droplets tremble, then fall one by one, tiny clear beads that vanish as soon as they touch the forest floor. The rhythm has no urgency, just the kind of soft consistency that makes the world feel older and wiser than your own worries. You take a breath, letting the damp, loamy smell of the forest settle in your lungs. As you make your way deeper, The slope of the land changes subtly. The ground rises, firming beneath your feet, and the air shifts, drier, tinged with the faint scent of crushed leaves. Here the oaks grow taller, their roots anchored in soil that has allowed them to stretch upward without strain. You pause again, tilting your head back to see the canopy far above. The branches interlock with a kind of effortless balance. Trees that grow in good company often do. You circle one of them slowly, observing the slight sweep of its trunk. Not a flaw, just a gentle arc, shaped by years of leaning towards sunlight. The sweep could give a beam, with interesting character, maybe even a natural curve perfect for a brace. Old carpenters often said that wood with personality made a house feel more alive. You smile quietly at the thought, amused by how trees, even when rooted to the same ground, insist on growing with their own preferences. Your boots scrape lightly against a patch of dry bark that has fallen away, exposing the pale sapwood beneath. You crouch and pick up a piece of the bark, turning it over in your hand. The underside is smoother, almost polished by time, while the outside still holds the rough texture of weather and insects. You break a small bit off, hearing the soft crackle as it snaps. The sound is small but oddly pleasing, a reminder of how even fallen pieces carry the tree's quiet resilience. You drop the bark gently and straighten again, placing a hand against the exposed wood. The sapwood is cool and slightly softer to the touch, its colour like muted honey. Beneath it lies the heartwood, the true treasure, tight-grained, hard and richly coloured. It's the part that withstands centuries if protected, the part that makes timber-framed houses stand through storms, wars, neglect, and the occasional misguided attempt at renovation. You can almost sense that strength from here, a quiet confidence hidden behind the still lingering rough edge of the tree's life. A squirrel darts across a nearby branch, pausing to look down at you with a twitch of mild suspicion. You offer no challenge, you simply exist in its space for a moment. It scampers off again, tail flicking, and the branch sways briefly, sending a few loose leaves drifting downward. One lands beside your boot, its yellow veins glowing faintly in the morning light. You nudge it with your toe, appreciating the delicate network etched across its surface. Nature seems endlessly patient with its details. You continue forward, stepping over a fallen log, softened by years of quiet decay. Moss blankets part of it in thick green velvet, while mushrooms build tiny pale colonies along its sides. The forest shows you, without insisting, that everything has its time: growth, endurance, decline and return. From such cycles, the strongest timber emerges. Wood that has grown slowly, steady and dense, shaped by seasons that demanded both resilience and compromise. Farther ahead, you find another promising oak. This one stands as if carved by intention, straight as a pillar, bark dark and deeply grooved. You press your ear lightly to the trunk, an old habit some craftsmen once practiced, not expecting to hear anything, but enjoying the closeness. The wood is cool against your cheek. You tap it again with your knuckles, a deeper tone this time, like a drum played softly by earth itself. The sound settles into your chest, grounding you. You trace a faint scar spiraling up the trunk, evidence of a long-ago branch broken in a storm. It healed well, leaving only the gentlest twist in the wood beneath the bark. Such a mark tells you something important. The tree has endured strain and corrected itself. Wood like that often becomes beams that hold houses with a kind of stubborn loyalty. You find yourself quietly admiring it, the way you might admire someone who lives without fuss, yet carries the weight of their history with grace. A gust of wind moves through the trees, rustling leaves in a soft wave that travels from trunk to trunk, like a whispered message passed along the canopy. The mist thins further, revealing more of the forest floor. Patches of brown leaves, stretches of moss, the faint glimmer of water on a distant stone. You breathe deeply, the air clean and cool, and feel a small easing in your chest. There is something soothing about choosing trees this way, guided not by rules, but by a combination of observation, instinct, and a willingness to let the forest set the pace. You walk a little farther, stopping once more to look back over the oaks now behind you. They stand patient and unapologetic, offering nothing more than what they are. Yet from them, entire homes can be shaped, homes that creak in winter, settle in spring, breathe in summer heat, and endure through autumn storms. You understand now why carpenters of old moved through the forest slowly, choosing trees not by necessity alone but by quiet companionship. A good beam begins with respect, and the forest seems to recognize when you offer it. You rest your hand on one last trunk, feeling the grain beneath the bark, the tension and ease running along its length. The tree stands steady, its history written in rings you cannot see but somehow feel. Every inch of it carries a story shaped by wind, light, water, and time. And as you breathe in the cool, fading mist, you sense that part of that long, quiet biography is already preparing to join your hands, your tools, and eventually the shelter that will stand long after your own name has faded. The forest grows quieter behind you as you return to the clearing where the chosen logs wait, their lengths resting patiently on the soft ground as if they've been expecting you. The morning air has warmed just enough to soften the edge of the chill, and the mist has thinned into wisps that drift lazily in the spaces between trunks. Everything feels unhurried, as though time itself has agreed to slow its pace so your hands can match it. You step closer to the oak you selected earlier, its bark still cold, still lined with deep furrows that speak of long seasons and steady growth. You steady the broad axe in your hands, the handle worn smooth by years of work. You run your thumb along the wood, feeling faint grooves left by the palms of other craftsmen who once relied on this very tool, or one much like it, to shape the bones of houses that still stand in distant villages. The weight settles comfortably into your palms, neither too heavy nor too light, like something that knows its purpose and expects you to know yours. You place the blade gently against the bark, letting it rest there for a moment. The steel is cool, the contact firm, but not urgent. The wood offers no resistance, it simply waits. You take in a slow breath, letting your shoulders relax, the axe settling into alignment with your arms, as though guided by the memory of countless cuts made before. The moment stretches itself into stillness, and then, with no declaration or ceremony, you draw the axe back and begin. The first strike is measured, the blade biting into the bark with a soft thunk that vibrates up the handle and into your wrists. A small chip of bark springs free and skitters across the ground. You exhale, not realizing you've been holding your breath. The rhythm finds you almost immediately. Lift, swing, impact, breath. Over and over, each motion is steady, predictable, and almost meditative. The forest seems to lean in to watch, not intrusively, but with the quiet curiosity of a place accustomed to patient labour. As more chips fall, exposing the pale, fleshy wood beneath, you begin to understand why carpenters once described this stage of work as a conversation. Not a loud or argumentative one, something gentler, shaped by attention more than words. You cut, the wood responds. You adjust, the wood reveals something new. The grain speaks in long slanted whispers, guiding you to swing slightly, to the left or angle the blade just so. When the axe catches a knot, you feel it instantly. A jarring fullness in the handle, a polite reminder that nature rarely offers perfect straight lines. Your breath settles into a comfortable pattern. Swinging the broad axe no longer feels like work, so much as participating in a rhythm older than any beams you will ever raise. It is the sort of rhythm that your muscles learn without instruction, as though passed down through your bones instead of words. Sweat begins to bead at your temples, but the cool air keeps your skin calm, and the labour feels strangely soothing. Each chip that falls seems less like waste and more like a small unveiling. The bark continues to peel away under your steady strokes, revealing the shape hidden inside. You picture the beam that will eventually emerge, straight, square-edged, clean-grained. Though for now, it exists only as possibility. Old carpenters spoke often of seeing the beam inside the log, not in mystical terms, but in the same way a sculptor sees the figure inside marble. With every hewn surface, that idea becomes easier to understand. The log is a block of time, and you are simply trimming away the years that aren't needed. The axe bites deeper as you work along the length of the trunk. The exposed surface begins to flatten, rough but already taking on the beginnings of a clean plane. Your hands adjust their grip instinctively when the wood's texture shifts, when the grain begins to dip or climb. You follow these subtle cues the way a reader follows the tone of a sentence, not forced, just understood. Wood has moods, and oak is famously honest about them. If you push too hard, it pushes back. If you stay patient, it cooperates with a quiet dignity. You pause briefly, not to rest, but to feel the texture of the newly hewn surface beneath your fingers. It is ridged with shallow arcs left by the axe blade, like the slow ripple of water lightly disturbed. The surface is cool, still carrying the chill of the morning through its fibres. You close your eyes for a moment and let your hand rest there, sensing the density of the heartwood beneath. There is a satisfaction in this tactile knowledge, the kind that cannot be learned from diagrams or treatises, only from touch. A breeze drifts through the clearing again, ruffling your hair and scattering a few loose bark chips. The smell of fresh-cut oak rises with it, sharp, sweet, resinous. It fills the air with the unmistakable scent of work just beginning. That smell has lingered in workshops for centuries, carried in the folds of clothing and the cracks of doorways, a kind of quiet announcement that something sturdy and long-lasting is being shaped. You step around to the other side of the log, adjusting your stance. The ground is soft beneath your boots, and the forest floor gives slightly as you plant your feet more firmly. The next series of blows comes naturally, each arc of the axe guided by momentum rather than force. The blade finds its rhythm again, striking with a thud that is neither sharp nor dull, but comfortably in between. The sound of wood accepting the edge without complaint. As you progress, the work becomes more deliberate. You chip away larger pieces, taking care not to remove too much at once. A beam is coaxed into shape, not demanded. Each stroke shaves away a little more bark, a little more sapwood, revealing the straighter, cleaner line beneath. The chips begin to collect in small piles around your boots, curled wafers and rough fragments that tell the story of your progress. Some pieces are thick and heavy, others thin and delicate, each falling with its own faint tap onto the ground. Your arms begin to warm from the repetitive motion, not in a painful way, but with the pleasant heaviness that comes from purposeful work. Your movements feel smoother now, guided as much by instinct as by technique. You adjust the angle of your shoulders slightly, shift your feet, and the axe responds, the blade gliding through the wood with unexpected ease. The more you settle into the rhythm, the more the work feels like a conversation shared between old friends. A fine dust begins to cling to your clothes, catching the sunlight in tiny wandering specks. The sun has climbed higher now, stretching long beams of light across the clearing. You notice how the brightness highlights the pale wood of the hewn log, making it glow softly. The contrast against the untouched bark, still clinging to the sides, is almost tender, a reminder that transformation happens slowly, one deliberate motion at a time. You pause again, leaning slightly on the axe handle, letting your breath catch up with the pace your arms have set. The clearing feels warmer now, but the air still holds enough coolness to refresh you with each deep inhale. You look at the length of the log, noticing how the flattened surface runs like a quiet path from end to end. There's a quiet pride in seeing its potential clarified. Not finished, not even close, but revealed enough that your hands understand where they will go next. You kneel briefly to clear away some of the fallen bark and chips so you can see the angle of your cuts more clearly. The ground is littered with fragments of oak, some darker, some pale, all with their own small textures and scents. As you brush them aside, you realize how much of timber framing depends on these unhurried movements. Simple actions done with attentiveness, each one building on the next. You rise again, gripping the axe in a familiar way, and return to the task. Swing after swing, the rhythm resumes. The beam emerges a little more clearly with every stroke. The wood's surface begins to feel truer, straighter, as if responding gratefully to the care you give it. This cooperation, this almost human willingness to meet you halfway, is what makes the craft feel less like labour and more like companionship. The sun warms your shoulders now, and the clearing has lost the last of its morning haze. The forest remains quietly present, watching without judging. Birds call intermittently from branches overhead, their voices weaving gently through the muted thuds of the axe. You continue your work, guided by a discipline rooted not in urgency, but in understanding. And as chips fall steadily to your feet, you sense something settling inside you as well. A quiet patience that mirrors the nature of the wood itself, shaped by years of standing still, enduring the slow weight of seasons. The beam is still only beginning to show itself, but for now, that is enough. The craft teaches you to move slowly, to listen, to feel, and to take joy in the quiet dialogue between your hands and the living memory of the tree. You rest the axe against your leg for a moment and kneel beside the timber, letting your breath even out as the quiet of the clearing settles around you again. The rough surface you've exposed is no longer just wood, it's the first part of a conversation, and you can feel that as your fingers drift across it. The texture rises and dips in long arcs, each one shaped by years of patient growth. You trace a line with your thumb, feeling how the grain shifts direction ever so slightly beneath the pale colour of the freshly opened wood. There's a faint creak barely audible as the fibres relax from the first cuts. It's a small sound, almost shy, yet it carries a certain intimacy. Wood behaves differently once sunlight touches what has long been hidden. You listen without hurry, letting the subtle noises guide your hand. The grain swells and contracts in places, gentle reminders that nature makes no straight lines without reason. The tree lived according to its own needs, bending a little toward better sun, thickening here to withstand a season of wind, and narrowing there where the hillside demanded thrift. The board in front of you is full of that history, and you can feel it in the shifting texture under your fingertips. You slide your palm down the length of the beam, the surface still uneven from the broad axe. Your skin catches on a slight ridge where the fibres rise stubbornly, refusing to lie flat. You press gently and feel the springiness of the grain, a quiet signal that something beneath the surface moves differently than you expected. Knots and twists tend to reveal themselves in this manner, not angrily, not in defiance, but with a sort of polite firmness, like someone gently clearing their throat to correct your assumption. The wood doesn't hide its temperament. Oak especially prefers to be honest. If it intends to twist, it lets you know early. If it hides a knot somewhere along its length, that knot will introduce itself soon enough, nudging your blade off its line with just enough stubbornness to remind you who has lived longer in this arrangement. You run your fingers over the spot again, amused at how the grain insists on speaking its mind. You can almost imagine it raising an eyebrow at you. Standing, you shift your weight and take a better angle on the timber. With the axe in hand again, you start shaving small slices away, each cut following the grain's suggestion more than your own impulse. The work becomes less about force and more about listening. The blade glides easily when you align it with the natural flow, sliding along a smooth line like water choosing the simplest path downhill. When you angle the axe in a direction the wood dislikes, the resistance deepens. A muted thud instead of a bright slice, a hesitation you can feel through the handle. You adjust immediately. Timber framing demands this kind of responsiveness, a willingness to negotiate rather than dictate. There's a soft pleasure in that cooperation, like working with an old friend who communicates mostly in gestures and half smiles. You let the grain show you where it wants to be followed, and in return, the work feels lighter, the labour less laborious. A knot emerges a few strokes later, a dark, swirling eye peering up from the centre of the timber. You pause to study it. The wood around it tightens, fibres winding inward in a small spiral. This knot was once a branch, perhaps one that stretched toward morning sun, decades before you ever set foot in this clearing. Now it sits here, firm and dense, refusing to be shaped in the same manner as the rest of the beam. You touch it with the flat of your palm, feeling its toughness, its refusal to give way. Knots like this rarely behave, but they're not flaws, they're character. You tilt your head slightly, amused by the challenge. There is a quiet lesson in every knot, a reminder that the tree lived, that it responded to its surroundings with choices and adjustments. You choose to work around it gently, allowing it to remain rather than cutting too deeply and risking a splintered wound. The grain shifts around obstacles like this, and you must shift with it. You angle the axe carefully and remove thin slivers from the edges of the knot, shaping the beam without disturbing what cannot be persuaded. The breeze thickens for a moment, rustling leaves overhead and brushing cool air across your arms. The sunlight flickers through the canopy, dancing over the hewn surface of the wood. You step back, momentarily watching how the grain catches the light. Pale streaks, darker lines, subtle waves that record storms survived and seasons endured. These variations are not faults, they are memory etched in fibre, and if you learn to read them, they guide your hands more effectively than any measuring tool. You remove another strip of bark from the far side of the log, revealing a section of wood with a straighter, cleaner pattern. The grain here runs long and true, almost eager to comply. You follow this line for a while, enjoying the smoothness of each stroke, the satisfying rhythm as the axe whispers through the fibres. It feels almost indulgent, working with wood that needs so little coaxing. But even in these easier moments, you know better than to become careless. Grain can change its mind without warning, and it does so with a kind of serene confidence that never apologizes. You wipe your brow with the back of your sleeve. The air is warming steadily, carrying the earthy scent of exposed wood and crushed leaves. A faint buzz of insects begins to hum in the distance, adding a soft undertone to your steady work. You kneel again and examine the timber closely, running your fingertips along the freshly hewn plane. The wood speaks through texture, gentle shifts in resistance, the slight give of sapwood, the firmness of the heartwood beneath. You learn to trust these small signals, to let them guide the rhythm of your cuts. You notice a subtle twist forming near the far end of the beam. Nothing dramatic, just a faint curve in the grain. Many carpenters would curse such things, but you find something endearing in the wood's insistence on telling its whole story. Straight beams may be easier, but the beams with character often carry houses with more warmth. You work around the twist with patience, adjusting your position until the blade follows the grain instead of fighting it. The axe glides once again, and the timber accepts each stroke with quiet agreement. There is an old understanding shared among woodworkers that the grain never lies. It reveals everything. Where the wood will split, where it will bend, where it will resist, where it will yield. You feel that truth as your hand glides over the beam, pausing at every ridge and smoothing each stubborn line with calm determination. You're not correcting the wood, you are collaborating with it. You're finding out how it prefers to be shaped. You straighten your back and stretch your shoulders, feeling the pleasant ache of steady work. The beam has begun to show its truer form, long, straight enough, imperfect in the ways that matter least, strong in the ways that matter most. The grain's moods have guided every motion, not an obstacle, but an invitation to pay closer attention. A few more chips fall, bouncing softly onto the forest floor. You brush them aside with the toe of your boot and run your hand over the surface once more. The wood creaks faintly, as if adjusting, accepting, maybe even approving. You never expect gratitude from timber, yet moments like this feel strangely reciprocal, as though the oak acknowledges your patience and offers its strength in return. You breathe in the scent of freshly opened grain, earthy and sharp, and let it settle in your chest. You understand now that shaping a beam is never about control. It is about listening to the quiet moods inside the wood, learning its preferences, and allowing its history to guide the work. And as the beam rests beneath your hand, warm now from the midday light, you feel the same steady calm that carried the tree through its long, quiet life, a calm that will follow you into the next piece of work, wherever the grain chooses to lead. You shift the beam into a better position, brushing away the last curls of wood that cling to its surface. The air around you has settled into a steady warmth, softened by the drifting scent of sap and earth. Somewhere overhead, a bird gives a single, disinterested chirp before falling quiet again, as though even it respects the slow concentration the work requires. You lower yourself to the ground beside the timber, knees pressing into the soft soil, and reach for the small pot of charcoal you set nearby earlier. The dust clings to your fingertips as you lift it, darkening the swirls already ghosting across your skin. You rub your thumb lightly across the rim, coating it just enough to leave clean lines. Then, leaning close to the beam, you draw the first marks. Straight edges, squared corners, faint outlines that suggest a shape hidden beneath the surface. The wood accepts each mark without complaint, the charcoal gliding smoothly along the grain, settling into its shallow grooves. These marks are not instructions, they're reminders. Quiet guides for hands that already know what to do. Your thumb follows the lines once more, pressing slightly to feel the faint drag of charcoal against wood. The softness of the dust contrasts with the firm resistance of the grain beneath, and you take a slow breath, letting the simple contact steady your thoughts. It's remarkable how much clarity can live in a few dark strokes on pale wood. Not brilliance, not invention, just habit layered over years of watching and learning. You reach for the other beam resting nearby and pull it gently closer. It's smaller, meant to meet the first in a joint that will give the frame its strength. You brush a few stray fragments from its surface and begin marking it too, tracing the outlines with your darkened thumb. Mortise here, tenon there. Shapes that fit one another, not by luck but by intention. You've seen enough of them to know that each joint carries its own personality, its own modest demands. Some are straightforward, others slightly stubborn, but all rely on the same quiet understanding between wood and hand. The light shifts as a cloud drifts lazily overhead. Shadows soften across the clearing, giving the wood a muted glow. You lean back for a moment, resting your palms on the ground, and look at the beams arranged in front of you. They lie like pieces of a puzzle, scattered by someone with endless patience. Nothing about them seems urgent. The work asks only that you pay attention. You take the chisel from where it rests beside your knee. Its blade is still sharp, the edge honed earlier this morning, when the forest was quieter and the dew still clung to the grass. You tilt it against the marked wood, aligning it with the charcoal lines, and press gently at first. The chisel sinks just slightly, enough to confirm the angle is correct. Then, with a small wooden mallet, you tap the chisel's end. The sound is soft, a hollow tap, almost musical in its restraint. A small curl of wood rises from the cut, pale and delicate, like a ribbon freed from a package. It falls onto your knee, then drifts to the ground. You repeat the motion again and again, guiding the chisel with your fingertips, tapping with the same steady rhythm. The mortise deepens gradually, its walls clean and smooth. The grain cooperates for the most part, though now and then it nudges the blade a fraction of an inch in its preferred direction. You adjust without irritation. Timber rarely misbehaves intentionally. It simply remembers its life more vividly in some places than others. As you carve, the faint smell of fresh shavings rises into the warm air, a scent both sweet and earthy, like the inside of a cupboard that has held wooden bowls for generations. The forest air stirs gently, carrying the smell just far enough to remind you how old these practices are, how many hands have shaped beams in places not unlike this. When the mortise reaches its depth, you stop and run a fingertip along the inside edge. The cut is clean, the corners crisp, the grain resting neatly within its new boundaries. You lift the chisel and tap it gently against your boot to remove a small cluster of dust clinging to its side. Then you turn your attention to the tenon on the second beam. Shaping a tenon feels different, more exposed, more revealing. Instead of carving into the wood, you are bringing something outward, coaxing the beam into a shape that will fit perfectly into its companion. You mark the shoulders of the joint once more with charcoal, pressing gently, ensuring the lines meet exactly where you want them. Then you begin cutting along the length of the tally marks, shaving away thin slices with controlled strokes of your saw. The sound is steady and satisfyingly dry, a soft rasp that blends with the warm hush of the clearing. Each pull of the saw sends a faint vibration through your arm, grounding you in the task. As the waste wood begins to loosen, you snap off the pieces cleanly with a flick of your wrist. They fall into your palm like heavy petals, warm from the sun and still smelling faintly of their inner fibers. You reach for the smaller chisel, the one with the narrow blade, perfect for refining the edges. It slips into your hand with familiar ease. You tilt it against the shoulder of the tenon and begin paring down the rough spots, smoothing the ridges left by the saw. The blade glides along the grain, catching on a tiny rise where the wood thickened in its younger years. You shave it down with a few gentle strokes, amused at how even small patches of stubbornness reveal stories about the tree's life. When the tenon finally holds the shape you intended, you brush off the final shavings and lift the beam. It's heavier than it looks, solid, purposeful, holding the weight of all the seasons it once grew through. You position it carefully beside the beam with the mortise. The two lengths of wood lie parallel, like quiet companions, waiting for you to test their fit. You guide the tenon into the mortise slowly. There is a certain intimacy in this moment, a familiarity between shapes that were carved separately, yet always meant for one another. The joint slides together with a soft, satisfying resistance, neither loose nor tight, just right. The fit is not perfect by strict geometric standards, but it is perfect for timber framing, where the strength comes from the embrace of wood meeting wood, not the illusion of flawless precision. You pull the beams apart again, examining the surfaces with a careful eye. The marks left by the fit tell you exactly where the wood touched, where the grain pressed softly against its counterpart. You scrape a tiny curl here and there, refining the joint with gentle corrections. There is no frustration in this. The process feels like easing two old acquaintances into a comfortable handshake. The forest hums quietly around you. A breeze rustles through the leaves above, sending a patch of sunlight drifting across the beams. You shift your weight, feeling the soft earth beneath your boots, and pick up the mallet again. You hold the beams in position and tap the tenon into place, letting the joint settle with its own sense of gravity. The mallet's thud is warm and reassuring, the sound of pieces finding their home. You run your hand along the joined timber. The connection feels confident, not rigid, not fragile, just steady. This is the secret that keeps old timber-framed houses standing through centuries of storms and seasons. The joints breathe, they adjust, they forgive, they hold because they are allowed to live, not because they are forced into immobility. You step back and breathe in deeply, tasting the faint sweetness of wood dust still drifting in the air. The beam rests quietly now, its new shape understood, its new purpose forming. You feel a small warmth settle in your chest. Not pride exactly, but something gentler. The slow satisfaction of work that expects patience rather than brilliance. Another puzzle waits in the next beam, and the one after that, but none of them hurry you. Each joint unfolds at the pace of your breath, shaped not by urgency, but by attention. And as you kneel again, charcoal darkening your thumb once more, the wood seems to welcome you back into the quiet, thoughtful rhythm that has held builders steady for centuries. You sit back on your heels for a moment, letting the quiet settle around the joined beams, while your breath cools in your chest. The air carries the soft sweetness of fresh shavings and the deeper scent of sun-warmed wood. Your hands still hold a faint memory of the mallet's weight, that comfortable reassurance of work done carefully rather than quickly. As the beams rest beside one another, you reach for the small bundle of tools you place nearby: draw knife, small hatchet, a few scraps of straight-grained offcuts saved from earlier shaping. The sun hangs just high enough now to cast a warm glow across the clearing. Shadows stretch gently beneath each beam, long but unthreatening, like tired dogs napping in familiar places. You choose a length of leftover oak, not much thicker than your wrist, and lay it across your knee. The grain runs clean, and even along its entire length. Straight-grained pieces like this make the best pegs, stubborn enough to hold two beams together for a lifetime, yet flexible enough to drive home without cracking. There's a certain humour in how something so small ends up being the quiet authority in a building's posture. You position the draw knife with practiced ease. The blade catches the light for a moment before you pull it toward you, shaving a long thin ribbon from the wood. It curls away softly, falling onto your boot like a strip of pale parchment. You continue drawing the knife in steady motions, each pull shaping the peg into a rough cylinder. The quiet rasp of steel against oak blends into the warm stillness, a whispering rhythm that seems to calm even the birds. Your hands guide the knife more by feel than sight. The grain tells you where it prefers to give and where it insists on holding firm. As the shape begins to form, you tilt the wood, adjusting the angle with a small shift of your fingers. The peg narrows evenly, its surface smoothing under the blade's sure edge. The simplicity of the task does something soothing to your thoughts. No complicated measurements, no heavy tools, just the slow thinning of a small stick destined to hold a house together. You inspect the peg, turning it between your fingers. It's remarkable how much quiet authority lies inside a piece so modest. You trim the ends with a small hatchet, giving them gentle chamfers that will help them slide through the joints without splintering. The chamfered tip feels satisfying under your thumb, like the point of a pencil, sharpened just right. More curls fall around you as you work through a second piece of scrap. The clearing grows bright with scattered shavings, some thick and curled, others thin enough to flutter at the slightest breeze. They gather around your knees in little nests, their pale edges catching the sunlight. You brush a few aside, laughing softly at how quickly such tiny tasks create such generous debris. Peg making always looks like a simple job until you realize the ground has become a small snowdrift of oak ribbons. The next peg emerges slightly thicker than the first. You run your finger along its length, feeling a slight unevenness. Not a problem, just a suggestion from the wood that it prefers a slower hand. You grip the draw knife again and shave a bit more, careful not to rush. Pegs aren't measured by eyesight alone. You learn their fitness through fingers and instinct, by the small dance between blade and grain. Every stroke carries a faint satisfaction, the kind that accumulates quietly rather than announcing itself. When you finish shaping a handful of pegs, you lay them neatly in a row along the beam. They look almost ceremonial there, uniform, modest, and oddly dignified. Each one is a small promise of future stability. You choose one at random and slip it into your palm, appreciating the way its weight feels almost symbolic. Light, yes, but important in a way that defies its size. You return your attention to the joint you shaped earlier. The tenon sits proud, waiting to be locked into place. You ease the two beams together again, fitting the tenon into the mortise with a steady push and a small adjustment of your shoulder. The wood meets itself with familiar reluctance, then soft acceptance as the shapes align. Even without pegs, the joint holds its form, though only loosely. It waits for the small companion that will make its connection permanent. You set the peg gently at the edge of the drilled hole. The opening looks simple enough, round, clean and deceptively ordinary, but you know the true precision hides inside. A peg that is too thin wobbles. One too thick splits the beam. Somewhere between these extremes is a sweet spot found mostly by feel. You lift the mallet, its handle worn smooth, from years of hands very much like yours. The first tap is soft, barely more than a touch. The peg sinks an inch, encouraged rather than commanded. You tap again, the mallet's wooden face thudding against the peg's end, with a sound that lands warmly in the air. It's the kind of sound that carpenters learn to appreciate the way others appreciate the pop of a cork or the crunch of footsteps on fresh snow. The peg descends slowly, steadily, the wood around it tightening as if wrapping its arms around the new addition. A few flakes rise from the joint's edge and drift to the ground, but nothing complains. You continue tapping gently, amused by how easily such a small thing decides whether the beam stands confidently or slouches like a traveller who has walked too far without rest. When the peg seats itself fully, the tone changes. The mallet's thud becomes duller, the vibrations through your hands softening as the wood settles. You stop, listening to the silence that follows. A silence that feels approving, almost content. You run your thumb over the peg's flush surface, feeling the slight warmth left by the mallet's touch. You move to the next joint, selecting another peg. Each one carries its own mild personality, dictated by the grain that runs through it. Some slip into their holes eagerly, some require coaxing with a few extra taps, and others seem determined to make you earn their cooperation. You take them all in stride. There's humour in this quiet stubbornness, a reminder that even a peg no wider than your finger has opinions about its role in a house. As you tap the next peg home, a small breeze wanders through the clearing, ruffling the curls of wood scattered around your feet. They rustle lightly, some lifting off the ground and tumbling across the dirt like playful scraps. You pause to watch a few spin before settling again. Even the smallest remnants of the work seem alive in moments like this. The beams now sit locked together, pegs securing their bond with simple confidence. You push lightly against the joined timbers, testing their resolve. They remain firm, answering your pressure with steady resistance. The ease of their strength reassures you, not because you doubted your work, but because there's comfort in seeing how well these traditional methods still hold. You kneel again to gather more shavings into a small pile. The pile grows warm under your fingers, sun-soaked and feather-light. You let a few strands drift from your hand, amused at their weightlessness compared to the thick beams they once concealed. It's strange how the smallest parts of the job multiply, while the biggest parts seem to shrink with your effort. You take another unfinished peg in your hands and turn it between your fingers. The grain spirals gently near one end, a subtle twist you hadn't noticed before. It won't do for the tightest joints, but it will find its place elsewhere. The imperfections in these pieces rarely disqualify them. They simply suggest a different role. Wood is like that, not wrong, just particular. You shape the next peg with slower motions, appreciating the way the draw knife whispers through the grain. The sun warms your shoulders now, and the air carries the mingled sense of sap, soil, and your quiet labour. Each curl that falls from the blade adds to the growing nest around your boots. A soft reminder of progress, measured in small, light layers rather than dramatic steps. Another peg finishes, then another. You lay them neatly in a row, tapping each lightly with your fingertip, as if greeting a collection of small, dependable friends. They sit straight, unassuming and ready, the humble guardians of walls yet to rise. And as you reach for your mallet again, feeling the smooth curve of its handle settle naturally into your palm, the work ahead unfolds with a patient rhythm, guided by the soft humour that lives in these tiny decisions of wood and hand. You brush a few last curls of wood from your knees and rise, stretching your back as the light shifts across the clearing. The beams lie ready now, joined, pegged and waiting with the quiet patience of things that know their purpose. Their surfaces catch the sunlight in pale matte glints, each angle sharp enough to show where your hands have guided them. Not far from you stands the tall ridge post that will anchor the frame, its presence steady and reassuring. A faint breeze runs along the beams, stirring the lighter shavings into lazy spirals. Before long, the sound of footsteps drifts through the trees. One set, then another, soft crunches of boots on earth, the muted murmur of greetings that require no volume. Neighbours approach with the kind of unhurried ease born from shared labour, the kind that asks for no explanation because the work itself has always spoken more clearly than conversation. They nod to you as they arrive, their expressions calm, their hands already calloused enough to understand what will soon be asked of them. Ropes are laid out in coils, thick hemp strands, rough to the touch, yet made softer with age. You lift one, feeling the weight settle across your palm. The fibres scratch pleasantly against your skin, each one carrying faint traces of resin and weather. These ropes have pulled more than beams in their time. They've hoisted carts from muddy ruts, hauled hay into lofts, and anchored boats against stubborn currents. Today, they will guide the growing skeleton of a house into the air. The beams are arranged in the order they will rise, the long posts, the connecting ties, the braces that will keep everything steady. Their shapes fit together in your mind, the way a familiar melody fits itself into silence. You stand beside the first pair, running your hand along the grain, where your tools left a gentle memory. The wood feels warm now, sun-soaked and willing. It's a good feeling, knowing the beams recognise their place in the world. One of the older neighbours, a man with deep-set wrinkles and a beard flecked with sawdust, takes hold of the far end of the rope. He nods once, not as instruction, but as acknowledgement. Across from him, two younger villagers grip the opposite line, their hands adjusting instinctively to find the right balance of tautness and give. You join them, feeling the rope tighten between your fingers, like a living thing preparing itself. The clearing stills for a moment. Even the birds seem to wait. Then comes the first lift. It starts not with a shout, but with a shared breath. The posts rise from the ground slowly, their weight spread among many hands. The wood creaks as it leaves the earth. An old, reassuring voice, the kind that belongs to something sturdy and uncomplaining. You lean your weight backward, pulling in a smooth arc. The rope bites gently into your palm, not painfully, just insistently. Your muscles answer with steady strength, guided less by force and more by rhythm. The post lifts, rising from horizontal into a slow, deliberate tilt. Its base pivots in the trench prepared for it, settling neatly into the hollowed earth. The creak deepens, echoing through the clearing in a tone that sounds almost like relief. You pull again, and the post straightens further, inch by inch, the movement unbroken and confident. Around you, no one speaks. There's no need. The work has its own language, shared through breath, through the tightening of a shoulder, through the lean of a hip, through the angle of a wrist adjusting just slightly to match the shifting weight. The rope's tension rises and eases like a long exhale. The post reaches vertical. The older neighbour slides a wedge into place at its base, tapping it lightly with the heel of his hand. The wood answers with a soft, satisfied thump. The post stands on its own now, tall and clean against the sky. You step back, and for a moment the world feels wider, as though the clearing has opened a small doorway into the future. Next come the connecting beams. These lie in pairs, their ends marked and shaped to lock into the waiting posts. You lift one end with the help of another neighbour, feeling the weight sink into your shoulders. The beam rises, balance between you, and together you guide it toward the base of the upright post. The tenon meets its mortise with a small kiss of contact, wood brushing wood like two old friends, finding each other again after time apart. A few gentle taps from a mallet ease the joint into place. Another peg waits in your pocket. You slide it into the hole and nudge it through with careful force. The peg sinks slowly, tightening the joint with the same quiet certainty you've come to appreciate in these small wooden anchors. You return to the ropes, tying them to the far end of the next beam. The knot feels familiar in your hands, the fibres gripping themselves with the stubborn confidence of good hemp. Together, everyone lifts once more. The beam rises, swaying slightly in the air, its length heavy but cooperative. The movement feels strangely graceful, as though the wood itself understands the importance of patience. As the second post rises alongside the first, the two beams align in a shape that already resembles the faint beginning of shelter. The creaks grow louder, echoing through the clearing like the house clearing its throat before speaking its first full sentence. You smile to yourself. The sound is oddly comforting, like the groan of an old boat settling into calm water. More neighbours arrive, some carrying wedges, others bringing water or bits of bread wrapped in cloth. They join the circle without ceremony, picking up ropes, steadying beams, or simply offering the quiet company that turns work into something warmer. The number of hands grows, but still few voices rise. A murmur here, a short instruction there, nothing more. The house seems to prefer silence, and everyone honours that preference. You step around to check the alignment of a brace. Its angled tenon meets the post, with a slight gap. You crouch, adjusting the base with a small chip of wood until it fits cleanly. These little corrections carry a kind of tenderness, small gestures that acknowledge the wood's needs rather than insisting on perfection. You tap the brace into place and the frame steadies itself. The structure rises slowly, section by section. Posts lift, beams slide into place, braces lock the angles with quiet determination. The skeleton of the house grows taller, casting long angled shadows that stretch across the clearing. These shadows shift with every new addition, forming shapes that look like a wooden cathedral in waiting. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow, though the breeze cools your skin almost as quickly as it warms. The sun sits higher now, catching the edges of the newly raised frame and turning them into pale gold. The ropes lie slack for a moment, resting in the grass like tired snakes. You coil one lazily, letting the fibres slide across your palm. There is no rush, only the slow unfolding of a centuries-old method, carried out by many hands working with the same quiet purpose. Another beam rises, another peg finds its home, another joint settles with a sound that feels almost like gratitude. You can feel the frame gaining confidence with each connection, as though realizing its own strength. By the time the final beam is eased into place, the structure stands tall and calm, its lines clean, its joints firm. You step back, alongside neighbours, alongside tools, alongside the hum of tired but contented breaths, and look up at the frame silhouetted against the sky. It feels less like something built and more like something revealed. The wind brushes through the open skeleton, playing gently across the newly risen timbers. The house makes a small creak, soft, almost bashful, as if testing its voice for the first time. You smile at the sound. It's comforting, familiar, something like greeting an old friend you've only just met. And as you rest your hand on one of the freshly raised posts, warm from the sun and faintly rough beneath your palm, you feel the quiet promise the frame carries, a shape meant to stand, to shelter, to breathe with the seasons, held together not by noise or speed, but by the steady rhythm of many hands moving in shared silence. You keep your hand on the upright post a little longer than necessary, letting the faint vibration of the newly raised frame hum gently through your palm. It's subtle, almost nothing at all, but enough to remind you that the skeleton of the house is not fixed in the way stone would be. It shifts, stretches, settles into itself with the modest confidence of something that knows it will stand a long while. A light breeze passes through the open frame, slipping between the timbers like a visitor walking reverently through an unfinished chapel. You step closer to one of the broad bays between the posts and lean your shoulder against a tie beam, listening to the quiet sigh the wood makes as it adjusts. Not a complaint, more of a sleepy rearranging, the way someone nestles deeper into a mattress after finding a comfortable position. The frame stands straight, yet not rigid. Its strength comes not from stubborn refusal to move, but from the willingness to bend, breathe, and settle with the seasons. Tools lie nearby, woven bundles of hazel rods, a basket of straw, a small mound of clay dug from the stream bank. These simple materials look almost too humble to become walls, yet they have sheltered countless families across centuries. Warm in winter, cool in summer, forgiving in storms. You pick up a hazel rod and bend it lightly between your hands. It flexes with gentle resistance, eager to be woven into the lattice that will fill the empty spaces between the beams. The others begin laying the first wattles, pushing the slender rods between the upright staves fixed at the base of each bay. You kneel to take your place, sliding a rod through the narrow gap, twisting it just enough so it catches between the posts, like a whispering thread. Another rod follows, then another. Each one interlocks with the next, building a woven basket that fills the empty frame. The pattern feels ancient in your hands, simple enough to learn in a minute, subtle enough to perfect only through years of touch. There is a quiet satisfaction in this weaving, a slow rhythm that makes conversation unnecessary. The rods creak softly as they settle into place, the sound blending with the distant call of birds and the low hush of wind threading through the frame. You work steadily, amused by how the wall seems to grow, almost as if of its own will. Hazel bends easily, shaping itself to the timber's contours. It's a gentle collaborator, neither stubborn nor fragile. When the lattice reaches your chest, you stand, brushing dry bits of bark from your palms. Someone brings forward the basket of straw, golden, sun-warmed strands that rustle like dry grass in late summer. You take a handful, twisting it lightly with your fingers. The straw crackles faintly, a pleasant airy sound. Mixed with clay, it becomes something stronger than either material alone. There's a mild humour in realising that centuries-old houses depend on this combination. Mud and weeds and patience. A shallow trough has been dug in the centre of the clearing, filled with clay-rich soil and water from the nearby stream. The mixture sits thick and dark, cool even in the warming sun. You wade into it barefoot, the mud rising between your toes, with a squelching weight that makes you smile despite yourself. It's impossible to feel rushed when your feet are anchored in clay. You gather a handful of the mixture, working it between your fingers until it softens into something pliable. Straw is added in clumps, and you knead it into the clay, twisting and folding, feeling the fibres distribute themselves like a net within the cool earth. The smell rises rich and honest. Damp soil, crushed grass, a faint mineral tang. It clings to your hands, your arms, your clothes, but there is nothing unpleasant in it. The scent feels grounding, like standing close to the roots of something ancient. You carry a lump of the mixture to the wall and press it gently against the woven hazel. It spreads with surprising willingness, sinking into the gaps, hugging the rods, gripping the fibres. You smooth the surface with your palm, flattening it in broad strokes. The clay makes a soft sound as it settles into place, a kind of wet sigh. You add more, building the layer gradually. Others join you, working quietly. Each handful of daub fills a little more space, turning the open lattice into a dense, cohesive surface. The wall grows thicker. You feel its weight increasing as you apply the mixture. The hazel rods bow slightly, but hold firm, distributing the load with quiet resilience. This system, these few materials working together, always feels more intelligent than it looks. The clay insulates, the straw prevents cracking, the rods anchor the mixture, and the timber frame absorbs the slow shifting of everything as it dries. You step back for a moment to look at what has formed. The bay, once open and airy, now carries a textured skin the colour of river mud. It is uneven in places, bulging in others, but that is part of its quiet charm. A wall like this does not try to appear flawless. It simply tries to breathe. Warm air moves through the clearing, brushing across the damp surface. Tiny fissures begin to appear almost immediately, hairline cracks that branch like delicate veins. You brush your fingertips across one, feeling the clay's eagerness to settle into its final form. These cracks aren't failures. They're part of the aging process, the wall tightening its fibres as it dries. Later, more clay will fill them, smoothing the surface until it is ready for lime plaster. Your hand slips to the timber beside the wall. The frame shifts almost imperceptibly, a faint, hesitant creak. The sound is intimate, like hearing someone breathe in their sleep. You press your palm more firmly, feeling the wood warm under your touch. It stands with the same calm strength it held earlier, but now with just the slightest hint of contentment, as though it feels more complete, with the walls beginning to wrap around it. More daub is mixed, more straw disappears into clay, more handfuls are pressed into the waiting lattice. You fall into the rhythm easily. Gather, press, smooth, breathe. The world narrows to this repeating sequence, as comforting as rocking in a slow chair. Your arms, streaked with drying clay, move steadily. The clay cools your hands even as the sun warms your shoulders. As the wall thickens, the air behind it shifts. You notice how sound softens, how wind becomes a muted presence, how the scent of wood and clay mingles into something distinctly home-like. Even before the roof arrives, before lime and thatch and hearth, the space between the timbers begins to feel enclosed. A small harbour taking shape in the midst of the forest. The final bit of daub for this bay goes on with a satisfying heaviness. You smooth the surface, leaving faint arcs of your fingers in the drying clay. Later, plaster will erase these marks, but for now, they feel like a sort of signature, a quiet acknowledgement of the hands that shaped the wall into being. A small crackle behind you draws your attention. The frame settles again, just a fraction. The sound is gentle, almost affectionate, as though the house is adjusting to the new weight in the same way someone pulls a blanket more firmly around themselves. You smile and press your hand to the timber once more. The post stands steady, the braces hold firm. The wall breathes quietly as it dries, and in that slow, settling silence, the beginnings of shelter take on a life of their own. Part wood, part earth, part air, part the steady rhythm of your hands. You wipe a smear of clay from your hands and rise, feeling the gentle pull in your knees from hours spent grounding walls into place. The clearing around you has shifted again with the afternoon light. The timbers stand tall, softened by the glow of the sun, their long shadows stretching over the rough earth like protective arms. The daubed walls breathe quietly behind you, their damp surfaces beginning to tighten and cool. Above all this, the unfinished roof beams wait in open air, the sky showing clearly through their thin arrangement. You walk toward the base of the house where several long rafters lie in neat rows. each one shaped earlier and left to rest in the sun. Their ends are chamfered, smoothed where they will meet the ridge beam, and their lengths taper just enough to keep the roof light without losing strength. You run a hand along one of them as you pass. The wood feels dry now, warmed from hours of sunlight, and faintly dusty, as though it has absorbed some quiet wisdom from the day. Neighbours return to their tasks with the same unspoken rhythm as before. A pair of them lift a rafter together, moving without hurry, their steps matched by instinct more than instruction. You take your place beside them, grasping the timber's middle. The weight settles into your hands, not heavy, but present, like something that expects a certain respect. The rafter rises, tilting upward, as you all guide it toward the open frame. At the base of the wall, a ladder leans unevenly against a post, its rungs worn smooth from years of similar work. You steady it as someone climbs, carrying the upper end of the rafter. The air thickens slightly as the rafter ascends, its long shadow shifting across your face. You place your foot on the first rung, then the next, feeling the ladder creak faintly beneath your weight. A friendly creak, one that carries no urgency, only a modest reminder to move with care. The world opens beneath you as you climb. The half-made house spreads out around you, walls in progress, beams intersecting like quiet geometry. The forest edges appear farther away from this height, their branches forming a darker ring around the clearing. When you reach the top, you pause briefly, balancing with your hand on the ridge beam. Sunlight pours through the empty spaces, warm and abundant, giving the air a faint shimmer. The rafter is lifted into place, its upper end resting beside your shoulder. You shift your stance, taking more of its weight and guiding it toward the notch in the ridge beam. The fit is close, but the timber needs a small encouragement. You nudge it with the heel of your hand. It shifts with a soft thud, the kind that confirms it has finally accepted where it belongs. The lower end is eased into position by the neighbours below, dropping into its housing in the wall plate with the satisfying finality of a puzzle piece clicking into place. Another rafter follows, then another. You step carefully across the structure, placing your feet on sturdy beams, feeling each one answer with a subtle firmness. The sky spills light from above, unobstructed, turning dust particles into drifting sparks each time you move. The high vantage point gives the house an almost playful perspective, as though you are walking along the ribs of some wooden creature waiting patiently to come to life. When enough rafters line the frame, you sit astride one like a narrow bench, legs dangling on either side. You take a moment to breathe deeply. The scent of warm dust rises in the air, dry, faintly sweet, carrying the memory of sunlit barns and quiet attics where tools have slept for decades. It's a comforting aroma, free of pretension. Just wood, air and time. From below, bundles of thatching straw are passed up. Long golden sheaves gathered from fields, where wind once ran freely through them. You reach for one, lifting it onto the rafters beside you. The straw is surprisingly light, soft in some strands and stiff in others, smelling of warm earth and faint sunshine trapped inside hollow stems. You run your fingers through it, and the sound is whisper-thin, like pages turned in an old book. Thatching begins with the simple task of laying the first layer against the eaves. You tie a short length of twine around a bundle, then fit it carefully over the edge of the rafters. The straw drapes smoothly, its tips hanging in soft, uneven lengths that give the roof its earliest hint of texture. You press the bundle down gently, aligning it with its neighbours. It settles with a faint rustle, warm and familiar. A wooden thatching needle, long, slender, slightly curved, is handed to you. You guide a rope along the underside of the rafters, threading it through the needle's eye, then pull it up through the straw. The movement feels almost ceremonial, quiet and deliberate. The straw tightens as you pull, conforming to the shape of the roof without protest. You knot the rope and tuck it beneath the bundle, hiding its presence inside the warm, dry mass of reeds. More bundles arrive. The roof slowly transforms from bare bones into a golden layer that ripples with light. You work steadily, sliding straw into place, tucking and tightening, smoothing with your palm. Each gesture draws its meaning from repetition rather than thought. You learn the weight of a bundle in your hand, the sound it makes when it needs more twisting, the slight sieve when it has been tied too loosely. The craft becomes instinctual, guided by the tactile whispers of the material. As the layers thicken, the roof takes on its distinct shape, rounded in places, sharp in others, always forgiving. Thatched roofs do not demand perfect alignment. They thrive on gentle accumulation, each layer resting softly on the last. When you press your hand against the finished portion, it feels springy, almost alive. The straw holds heat with an unexpected kindness, storing the sun's warmth for cool evenings and insulating the house during winter's long nights. Below you, the clearing quiets into a soft harmony of footsteps and murmured instructions. The walls, still drying, seem to drink in the warmth radiating from the growing roof. The combination of clay, timber, and straw carries a scent that feels older than memory, an aroma of hearths not yet lit and stories not yet spoken. You shift along the rafters, moving toward the ridge. The height makes the breeze stronger here, carrying with it the dry rustle of straw, shifting gently as you work. The view stretches beyond the frame of the house, fields rolling into distance, treetops shimmering slightly in the sunlight. You anchor another bundle, then another, until the ridge itself becomes a thick line of woven texture, sturdy yet flexible. With each knot tied and each handful of straw pressed into place, the roof begins to exhale warmth, absorbing the light and radiating it back in soft waves. You pause to brush dust from your sleeve. It drifts downward, sparkling briefly before vanishing into the air. There's something comforting about how dust behaves in sunlight, unrushed, content simply to exist in small drifting motions. You continue along the rafters until the final bundle is in place. The roof now stretches above the house like a protective cloak, golden and inviting, carrying within it the scent of warm dust, dry reeds, and the lingering breath of the afternoon sun. The structure beneath it feels more whole, more grounded, as though the house itself relaxes under the familiar weight of a traditional roof. Climbing down the ladder, you glance up once more. The roof gleams in the lowering light, its layers thick and soft, shaped with the patience of hands working in quiet rhythm. Straw whispers as the wind moves gently through it, making the roof seem almost to breathe. The house stands beneath it with the calm assurance of something ready to endure, light, layered, forgiving, and filled with the honest scent of materials that have sheltered people for centuries. You step through the doorway just as the last of the daylight begins to soften, its edges mellow and warm. The roof above now shelters the interior from the sharp brightness of the sky, turning everything inside to shades of amber and dusk. Straw bundles rustle faintly overhead as a small breeze brushes across the thatch, creating a sound that feels both distant and familiar, like a whisper drifting through the rafters. The floor beneath your boots is packed earth, still uneven in places, still holding the scent of the clearing it once was. Small flecks of straw cling to its surface, and a faint trail of clay dust marks where someone brushed past earlier. You find the centre of the room and crouch beside the newly kindled fire. The flames flicker with the tentative energy of a beginner, uncertain at first, then more confident as the kindling catches and glows. Heat spreads slowly, curling around your hands, easing into your skin. The smoke rises in a thin ribbon, tracing lazy patterns toward the unplastered gaps where the roof meets the walls. Some of it escapes easily, whispering through the rafters. Some lingers for a moment before drifting upward with a sigh. There's nothing harsh about it, just the soft presence of a fire learning where it belongs. You settle onto a small bench, one you dragged inside earlier, its surface still dusted with the scent of the forest. The wood is cool beneath you, smooth in some places and rough in others. Shaped by hands rather than tools, it creaks faintly as your weight shifts. Though not in protest, more like acknowledgement. The house answers in its own way. A long beam overhead stretches with a gentle groan, adjusting to the warm air rising from the fire. Another timber releases a soft pop, as though waking from a nap. The frame makes these sounds without embarrassment, unconcerned with perfection. It breathes with the evening, expanding where the heat reaches it, relaxing where shadows settle. You find yourself listening with a kind of affection, admiring how the structure seems to speak without ever forming words. You lean back slightly, palms pressed against the bench, and feel the fire's warmth seep slowly into your chest. The glow illuminates the nearest post, revealing the subtle arcs left by your axe blade. The faint memory of the grain's moods, the tiny irregularities that give the wood its personality. The shadows slide across these marks like slow water, deepening the grooves, softening the edges, turning the beam into something almost alive. A pot hangs just beyond the flames, suspended from a simple iron hook. Inside, water warms with a soft simmer, sending faint ripples of steam into the air. The scent of herbs, just a few leaves tossed in earlier, mingles with the smell of warm earth and drying thatch, creating an aroma that feels both comforting and unpretentious. You stir the pot lazily with a wooden spoon, listening to the gentle clink as it touches the rim. The house seems to listen too. Each flick of flame, each shift of ember, each murmured bubble in the pot draws a small response from somewhere in the frame. A brace tightens slightly in its mortise. A post settles with a low hum. A beam above shifts its weight, offering a quiet creak. The sounds are subtle, but together they form a gentle language, one spoken in wood and warmth rather than syllables. You stretch your legs toward the heat, boots catching the firelight in faint, dusty glints. The floor beneath them feels solid, steady, grounded, though you know it will change over time. Timber-framed houses prefer honest settling. They lean a little one year, adjust the next, sigh on damp mornings, groan contentedly after sunlit afternoons. None of it feels like decay. It's simply the structure learning its own weight, its own balance, its own rhythm. The fire crackles softly, sending tiny sparks that drift upward before fading into small ghosts of smoke. The glow reflects on the freshly plastered section of wall, highlighting uneven textures and fingerprints left behind. Nothing inside this house is perfectly smooth. Everything carries the imprint of hands. Hands that pressed clay, shaped beams, tied straw, carved pegs, guided ropes. Even the air feels shaped by the work done here. Warm in some corners, cooler in others. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. The sounds layer themselves gently. The soft hiss of burning wood, the quiet ticking of cooling clay, the muted rustle of straw above, the occasional sigh of a shifting beam. A timber-framed house never truly falls silent. It simply speaks more softly when the fire is low. Your breath slows to match the rhythm of the room. In this half-light with the roof filtering the last glow of evening and the fire anchoring the interior in warm gold, the space feels alive, not with urgency, but with presence. The structure no longer resembles a collection of beams and walls. It has the calm posture of something newly awakened, seeing its purpose for the first time. The pot begins to boil, and you lift it from the hook, placing it on a flat stone near the fire. Steam lifts from the surface, curling upward in twisting lines that vanish into the shadows. You pour a small ladleful into a wooden cup, the warm liquid filling the space with the smell of herbs and heat. As you sip, the taste settles softly on your tongue, mild, earthy, steady. You move the cup aside and stand, stretching your shoulders. The house shifts in response, almost as though adjusting its posture to mirror yours. You walk slowly around the interior, fingertips grazing the beams, exploring the textures that your tools created earlier but feel different now that the house has begun to settle. Some timbers feel slightly warmer from the fire's reach, others retain the coolness of evening. Each one answers your touch with a different tone: creak, hum, sigh, crackle, sough. Near the doorway you pause to look outside. The clearing is dim now, the sky fading into deep blue. Fireflies flicker among the grasses, their tiny lights drifting like wandering embers. The forest stands quiet, its branches barely moving in the thickening dusk. The world beyond the house seems still, as though waiting for the structure to finish its first quiet conversation with itself. You step back inside, guided by the fire's glow. The warmth wraps around you gently. You lower yourself once more onto the bench, leaning forward with elbows on your knees. The house breathes around you, timbers adjusting, walls tightening, the thatched roof whispering softly overhead. A faint crack appears in one patch of drying daub, widening with a tiny, almost curious sound. You smile at it and press the edge lightly with your thumb. It yields just enough, as though acknowledging your presence. The evening deepens further, and the fire burns lower, its orange heart pulsing softly. You add a small log, listening as it settles against the embers with a muted thump. The flames rise again, brighter but still modest. Their glow paints shifting shapes on the beams, turning the interior into a quiet dance of warm light and deep shadow. You take another slow breath and lean back, feeling the day soften inside you. The house surrounds you with its gentle murmurs, groans from warming rafters, the faint tick of cooling pegs, the soft rustle of the roof adjusting to the night air. These sounds are not interruptions, they are reassurance. They tell you that the structure is alive in its own way, hospitable, responsive, attentive. You rest your palm on the nearest post. It is warm now, smoothed by the fire's breath and your own touch. The grain rises under your skin, subtle and steady, like a pulse. You let your hand linger there a moment longer, appreciating the quiet companionship that settles in the space between your breath and the house's. The night gathers around the walls, the fire glows low, and inside this living structure, this quiet, breathing shelter, you find a kind of calm that feels older than the craft itself, a sense that the house is already learning you as much as you are learning it. The night settles fully around the house, and you sit for a while longer by the soft glow of the embers, letting the quiet stretch comfortably. Eventually the fire sinks into a low, steady pulse, its warmth brushing your legs like the last exhale of a tired companion. A faint chill seeps through the doorway, hinting at the deep hours to come. You rise slowly, brushing crumbs of ash from your palms, and step outside for air. The clearing is hushed, washed in silver moonlight. The walls, still drying, drink it all in, giving the house a soft, muted sheen. The thatched roof above holds its own kind of glow, the straw catching bits of starlight in a scattered shimmer. You breathe deeply, the night carrying the scent of the forest. Cool leaves, damp soil, a whiff of distant pine. The air feels steady, cleansing. At the corner of the house, you notice a small crack in the daub, where the clay has tightened overnight. It's a thin line, almost shy, stretching no longer than your hand. You crouch beside it, running your fingertip lightly along the edge. The wall responds with a soft crumble of dry clay, nothing dramatic, just a modest reminder that timber and clay negotiate with time at their own pace. You fetch a small bundle of leftover straw and a clay bowl from near the fire. The clay inside is cool and pliable, its surface still damp from earlier mixing. You knead it with your fingers, folding straw into it in small pinches until the mixture thickens into something that clings willingly to your hands. You return to the wall and press the daub gently into the crack, smoothing it with your thumb. It spreads easily, filling the gap with a confidence that feels older than your own memory. As you work, a quiet amusement settles in you. Wood has its own sense of timing. Never dramatic, never rushed, always certain. The crack wasn't a problem. It was an announcement, a small polite throat clearing to let you know the house was learning its new shape. These reminders never feel like failures. If anything, they feel like invitations to look closer, to cooperate more attentively, to join the structure in its steady dance with humidity, warmth, and the passing of countless days. You stand and brush your hands clean, feeling clay flake away from your fingertips. The patched spot blends with the rest of the wall, not perfectly smooth but content in its imperfection. The house seems to approve, answering your touch with a faint creak from somewhere within the frame, a soft, appreciative sound. As dawn edges near, the world grows pale and cool. You rest briefly and watch how the light gathers itself along the beams and rafters. Early sun always reveals what the evening hid. A thin line of separation here, a small shift in angle there, the way a timber has leaned slightly beneath its own weight during the night. None of it feels alarming. These small adjustments belong to the skeleton of the house, as naturally as breath belongs to a sleeping body. You walk the perimeter slowly, fingertips grazing each post. The wood carries patches of coolness and warmth, depending on how the night air touched it. Some joints you inspect closely, turning your head, squinting, noting invisible shifts. A peg has risen a fraction of a hair's width, where the wood beneath expanded. You take your mallet and tap it gently, seating it again with a soft cooperative thud. The peg settles willingly, as though it had only been stretching. Inside, the beams overhead emit their morning murmurs. As the sun warms them, they loosen slightly, bending with the day's first touch of heat. You listen to the soft groans and clicks, each one unique, like a house stretching its limbs. You take a small chisel from your belt and shave a sliver from a tenon shoulder that has pressed too tightly into its housing. The wood yields under the blade, and the tension releases with a nearly inaudible sigh. The building stands more comfortably for it, as though expressing gratitude. You gather a few spare braces leaning against the wall. Their surfaces gleam faintly in the early light, the grain visible beneath the simple finish you rubbed into them days ago. You inspect them quietly, lifting one and weighing it in your hand. Some braces will strengthen corners where the frame prefers a bit of help. Others might replace lighter ones later, when the season changes and the house asks for adjustments. Reinforcing a timber structure isn't merely about preventing failure. It's about companionship, staying attentive to its subtle signals, understanding when a brace wants to help and when it wants to rest. You fit one brace into place at a diagonal, just below a tie beam, that feels slightly restless from the night. The wood responds as you raise it, aligning neatly as though guiding your hand. You tap it gently, seating it into the notch, then peg it with a small dowel. The connection tightens with an affirming tone. The frame steadies, its posture subtly adjusted. You feel it in your hands, like helping someone shift in a chair to ease their weight. Back at the wall you patched, the clay has already begun to settle, fine cracks spidering outward. You smooth them with a wet palm, blending them into the surrounding surface. The daub accepts your touch easily. You smile at the impermanence of it, at how the material insists on participating in the weather, the air, the passing days. Walls made of earth and straw are never still. They tighten in cold, relax in heat, breathe with the house. They never pretend to be stone. You return inside and sit once more near the old embers. Light filters through the cracks and gaps of the roof in soft ribbons. Dust motes float through them like drifting stars. The house watches with its quiet attention as you warm your hands over the rekindled flame. A low groan ripples through a brace overhead, one that feels almost conversational, as if the wood is telling you, "That's better." In moments like these, you understand why maintaining timber buildings rarely feels like a burden. It's a practice of noticing, an ongoing dialogue between your hands and the shifting structure, each speaking in its preferred language. A carpenter who listens never feels interrupted by these tasks. Repairs become gestures of care, small acknowledgements of time's slow, inevitable passage. You stand again and check another joint where the clay meets the beam. The edge has pulled away in a narrow seam no thicker than a fingernail. You press it gently with your thumb, rolling the clay inward, encouraging it to rejoin the timber. The wall complies easily, soft from last night's moisture. Your thumb leaves a faint impression, a transient reminder that hands shape these houses long after their first raising. A soft laugh escapes you at the sight of a tiny splinter stubbornly protruding from a brace. You pluck it free, amused by how wood insists on offering little surprises. Timber rarely lets you forget its organic nature. It expands, contracts, reveals knots you thought long gone, presents tiny fissures where you expected none. These irregularities give it spirit. Rules of geometry bend in favour of gravity, breeze, and the uncomplicated humour of living material. As the sun clears the treetops, warmth spreads through the interior, trickling across the walls and into the beams. The house adjusts again, quietly accepting the day. You listen to it, letting the sounds guide your work. No schedule dictates your movements. No demand rushes your hands. Maintenance becomes a wandering, intuitive ritual. Patching here, tightening there, brushing away bits of straw or clay dust, acknowledging every shift with patient curiosity. You pause near the doorway and rest a hand on the threshold beam. Its surface is smoother than the others, worn down by your own passage and that of the neighbours who helped raise it. A thin groove has formed where boots have pressed day after day. It's a mark of use, of life, of time spent entering and leaving. A space that grows more familiar with every breath. The timber beneath your palm feels warm now, humming faintly with the gentle tension of the house settling into midday. You close your eyes briefly and let your breath match its rhythm. A slow conversation, neither hurried nor demanding, carried out in creaks, murmurs, and the subtle, persuasive language of wood. In these easy hours of quiet repair, you realize how much the structure teaches simply by existing. It doesn't instruct, it reminds. It reminds you that strength is flexible, that endurance is cooperative, that time works not against it but with it. And as you smooth one final ridge of clay along a settling seam, the house answers with a calm, contented sigh, as though acknowledging your shared understanding. Morning light settles gently across the walls, slipping through the gaps in the thatch and tracing thin golden lines down the timbers. You stretch your fingers, feeling the faint stiffness left from patching clay and tightening joints, and walk deeper into the house. The beams respond as you move, small content sounds that ripple through the frame, as though acknowledging your presence before returning to their quiet settling. You pause beside one of the great posts. Its surface feels cool despite the warming air, the grain marked with alternating bands of pale and dark, each line a season captured and held. You rest your palm against it, feeling the wood's firmness, its stored strength, the way it seems to anchor the entire house with casual confidence. The post has already begun the slow transformation from tree to shelter, yet its history remains written in the tight rings beneath your hand. You lean closer, tracing those rings with a fingertip. Each circle, each subtle shift in tone, represents a year of the oak's life. Wet springs, dry summers, lean soil, generous rain. The growth rings grow tighter toward the centre, the heartwood dense and hardened from decades of patient endurance. What lies beneath your touch has survived storms, droughts, and harsh winters long before your tools ever came near it. Now that same resilience stands quietly inside the house, offering strength not through stubborn rigidity but through patient natural flexibility. You tap the surface lightly with your knuckles. The sound is deep and resonant, more like a drum than a hollow board. Timber like this ages in reverse of most things, growing harder, tighter, more reliable as the years pass. It doesn't weaken when its bark is stripped away or hollow out in its centre. Instead, freed from the burden of feeding leaves and branches, it concentrates its integrity inward, becoming tougher than the day it was felled. You can feel the truth of that under your palm. The house seems to breathe around you. A slight draft moves across the floor, carrying the scent of drying clay and warm straw. The breeze filters through small, intentional gaps in the walls. Space is left not from oversight, but from understanding. Houses like this do not pretend to be sealed worlds. They inhale with each change in weather, exhale as the day settles into night. You take a slow breath yourself, matching their rhythm without realizing you are doing so. You walk along the wall and stop at one of the corner braces. Its angle rests against the post like a supportive shoulder, the joint snug but not rigid. You touch the edge where the brace meets the beam. The joinery remains firm, yet there is a subtle give, something your fingers can feel even if your eyes can't see it. This slight movement is what keeps the structure alive through seasons of expansion and contraction. Wood is never entirely still. It softens when humidity rises, tightens when the air dries, changes shape in warmth, settles in cold, and a house built to accommodate those moods lasts longer than any stone or iron forced into brittle stillness. You step back, studying the brace. Its grain curves gently, following the shape of the tree it once was. No carpenter tried to force it into a flawless angle. The brace was cut to honour the wood's own inclination, and in doing so, it lends the entire frame a stability rooted in cooperation rather than insistence. You can't help but smile at how simple the lesson is. Buildings endure for the same reason people do, by yielding at the right moments, not by resisting everything that touches them. As you continue your quiet circuit around the house, you notice how different timbers carry different characters. Some posts stand with solemn straightness, their fibres dense and unfazed. Others carry slight swells or curves, subtle reminders that no tree grows perfectly uniform, and yet each piece fits its place effortlessly. The minor bends and irregularities do not weaken the structure. They strengthen it. They distribute stress in ways geometric perfection never could. You brush your fingertips along a beam that bows just slightly in its centre, amused by how proudly it holds the roof despite its gentle arc. Outside, the wind shifts direction. A faint groan rolls through the rafters, soft and slow. Not a complaint, just an adjustment. The sound moves through the frame, like a sigh, travelling through an old body that knows exactly how to keep itself balanced. You turn your ear slightly, listening as the vibration fades. Houses like this carry voices subtle enough to miss unless you learn to expect them. They speak in murmurs that reassure rather than alarm. You make your way to the far corner, where the daub has dried into a firm, cool surface. The clay feels smooth beneath your hand, but not sealed. You press gently, and the wall responds with a faint indentation. It yields ever so slightly, just enough to handle expansion and contraction without splitting apart. The earth inside remembers moisture and warmth the way skin remembers touch. Together with the timber, it creates a living envelope, never brittle, always adaptable. The floor creaks as you shift your weight. A beam beneath your foot bends a fraction, absorbing the movement like a quiet partner carrying shared weight. You have come to trust these sounds. They remind you that the house is doing what it was meant to do, flexing, balancing, cooperating with gravity rather than fighting it. Buildings made of rigid materials resist until they break. Timber frames bend and return, their joints moving like soft hinges. They absorb the world instead of shattering under it. You kneel beside another post and inspect its base where it meets the sill. The joinery remains clean, and the peg has seated itself tightly, drawn in by the natural shrinking of the surrounding wood. You touch the peg's exposed end. It is harder now than when you drove it in, dried by heat, tightened by time. It holds its place like a small guardian, insignificant in size, but essential in purpose. You stand again and walk toward the centre of the room, where a long tie beam stretches from wall to wall. Its underside carries tool marks from the day you hewed it, long, smooth strokes that shaped its rough exterior into something purposeful. You slide your hand along the underside, feeling each ridge and dip. The beam lifts the load of the roof without strain. It has settled into its role with the easy confidence of something built according to its own grain. Your gaze drifts upward to the rafters. The thatched roof above them breathes softly, warming in the sun's new light. Straw shifts with the breeze, creating tiny pockets of air that regulate temperature in ways that modern materials still try to imitate. The roof takes on and releases moisture, expands gently, contracts slowly. Cushioned by layers built with generous overlap, it protects not through impermeability, but through movement. You reach up and touch one of the rafters. Its surface feels smoother now, burnished by warmth and perhaps by a few hours of settling under the roof's gentle weight. You press lightly, and it flexes just enough to acknowledge the pressure. You imagine winter snow piling on thick spring rains, soaking the thatch, summer heat pressing down from above. The rafter welcomes all of it, turning hardship into endurance through the simple magic of yielding. Stepping back, you take in the entire space. The posts, beams, braces, walls, roof. Nothing in the structure is rigid. Every piece accepts its place, but keeps a little of itself. The wood you shaped still remembers its roots, its seasons, its storms, and that memory is precisely what keeps the house standing. It wants to endure, and it knows how. You feel the truth settle gently inside you. These homes outlive their builders, not because they are strong in the way iron is strong, but because they are wise in the way living things are wise. They survive not through perfection, but through patience. Not by resisting movement, but by allowing it. Not by holding tightly, but by adjusting slowly. You rest your hand once more on the nearest post. The grain beneath your palm feels steady and sure, its strength growing from everything it has already survived, and from everything it is still willing to become. You step out into the morning, letting the cool air settle against your face as the house behind you adjusts with a soft murmur. The forest path ahead winds gently, between trees, their leaves stirring in a patient rhythm, as if encouraging you forward. Sunlight filters through in thin, dappled beams, warming the soil in shifting patches. You follow the path without urgency, boots pressing lightly into the earth, breath drawing in the scents of pine, damp grass, and distant hearth smoke. The land opens gradually, revealing fields that stretch like quiet blankets across rolling ground. Beyond them, rooftops appear, gentle slopes of thatch softened by years of sun and wind, wood beams darkening into amber shades of age. A small village rests along the curve of a shallow valley, its buildings arranged not by design, but by comfort, as if each home simply chose the spot that felt most pleasant. You walk slowly toward the clustered homes, hearing the faint hum of daily life, low voices, the clink of a pail, the muted knock of wood against wood. The first structure you approach leans slightly to one side, the roof dipping in a polite nod toward the road. Yet nothing about it feels precarious. The lean is gentle, self-assured, the sort of settling that happens when a house decides where it feels most at ease. You run your hand along a beam near the doorway. The timber is dark, weathered, its edges softened by centuries of sun and fingertips. Beneath the smoothness, you can feel the faint rise and fall of grain, the ridges left by broad axes long forgotten. The beam carries the memory of the tree it once was, but also the memory of the hands that shaped it, steady hands that coaxed rather than commanded, guided rather than forced. Those hands are gone now, but their work remains, not as monuments, not as museum pieces, but as living companions woven into the rhythm of everyday life. A small crack near the joint tells you where the wood inhaled moisture during a long ago winter. A faint bulge in the post reveals where a knot once insisted on having its own voice. These small irregularities speak to you quietly, telling stories in a language that asks to be felt rather than heard. You wander deeper into the village. More homes lean with their own personalities. Some forward, some sideways, some with a playful tilt. As if sharing a private joke with the wind, none seem ashamed of their imperfections. They stand with a comfortable slouch, like elders resting on benches, content to be exactly as they are. Inside one doorway you pause. The floorboards dip unevenly beneath your feet, shaped by footsteps that walked this path long before you. Each plank creaks softly, not complaining, but acknowledging your presence. You press your palm to the nearest board. It is smooth along the centre, but rough near the edges, the grain carrying shallow grooves from generations of barefoot children running across it. Tiny marks reveal where repairs were made in quiet evenings, small wedges tapped into place, gaps filled with slivers of patience rather than precision. A woman in the house hums gently, somewhere behind a hanging cloth, her voice blending with the timber's quiet responses. The sound belongs to this place, woven into the walls the same way sunlight threads through the open window. You step back outside, letting the cloth fall closed behind you. As you move along the narrow street, another building draws your attention. Its upper story juts forward slightly, the beam supporting it bent with age, but holding firm with a stubborn charm. You tilt your head, amused. Whoever shaped these beams didn't worry about perfect lines. They trusted the wood to do its part, and the wood did. It bowed a little, settled a little, found a shape it liked, and stayed there. The house breathes with simplicity, an effortless proof that resilience doesn't need symmetry. Nearby, a small workshop stands with its door open. Dust motes drift inside like lazy dancers, floating in the warm glow of sunlight. You peer in, your eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior. The workbench is old, its surface worn to a gentle curve by hands long departed. You touch the smooth edge. The wood feels warm and unexpectedly tender, as though it remembers every tool that rested here, every quiet moment of concentration, every pause where a craftsman leaned back and considered the grain. On the wall hang tools whose handles are polished from use. Chisels, adzes, mallets, all carrying the imprint of palms you will never meet. Some bear small nicks, others carry faint scorch marks from being held too close to a fire on some hurried night. Their blades glint faintly, in uneven light, patient and unassuming. You imagine the craftsmen who once worked here, men who knew timber not through books but through touch, who read grain like a familiar script, who understood wood's peculiar habits the way one understands an old friend's stubbornness. They worked in seasons and rhythms, not deadlines, guided by the slow negotiation between their intentions and the wood's preferences. They didn't think about legacy. They didn't wonder whether their work would survive centuries. They simply shaped beams as well as their hands allowed, fitting joints with care, choosing timber that felt honest. The legacy formed itself. You leave the workshop and follow a slight curve in the path leading out of the village. Ahead, a row of houses stands at the base of a hill, each building leaning slightly inward, as if sharing secrets across the narrow street. The timbers are deeply darkened, almost black, polished by rain, wind, and countless seasons of sun. You run your fingers along one of the beams. The surface feels dense, strong, stronger than new oak. You can sense how the fibres have tightened with age, how the heartwood has grown stubborn, unyielding in places and unexpectedly flexible in others. You look up. The upper timbers are crooked, charmingly off-kilter. A brace runs at an angle, not found in any modern plan. More practical than symmetrical, more intuitive than theoretical. Yet it holds firm, carrying weight with effortless grace. You smile at the thought that the builder likely didn't plan for longevity. They probably hoped only that the roof wouldn't leak before the next winter, or that the walls wouldn't groan too loudly in a storm. And yet here their work stands, steady, patient, breathing gently beneath centuries of weather. As you continue up the hill, the land rises beneath your steps. From the crest, you look back at the village. The houses seem to lean toward one another, forming quiet shoulders of companionship. Their roofs ripple with uneven thatch, their walls wave softly with age, their beams curve as though shaped by the memory of wind. And yet they stand, not rigidly, not defiantly, but comfortably. The air stirs around you, carrying the smell of warm timber and a hint of chimney smoke. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. The village murmurs with soft sounds, creaks, sighs, shifting roofs, distant footsteps on old wood. It is a living museum, though no one calls it that. It is simply home, shaped by craftsmen whose names have long disappeared into soil and sunlight. Their legacy remains in every joint that still holds, every beam that still leans politely instead of breaking, every floorboard that still bends without complaint. Their signatures are shy, small chisel marks hidden under stairs, uneven pegs driven with slightly uncertain force, mortises that curve just a little where the hand hesitated. None of these craftsmen ever imagined their work would survive hundreds of years. They simply worked with patience, attention, and quiet respect for the wood. And the wood, in return, remembered them. The path curves gently downward from the hill, guiding you back toward the clearing where the house stands. Evening gathers around you, not abruptly, but in soft layers. Cooler air brushing your sleeves, the sky turning from warm gold to a patient blue, the first faint stars appearing without hurry. The forest around you darkens in places, while holding pockets of lingering light in others, as though the day is reluctant to settle entirely. When you reach the familiar clearing, the house greets you with the quiet posture of something at rest. The roof holds the last threads of sunlight, turning the straw into muted honey. The timbers show deeper colours now, browns rich as roasted chestnuts, greys softened by the breeze, hints of amber where the grain catches what little light remains. A faint warmth lingers in the posts from the earlier sun, though the air has cooled enough that you can feel a subtle contrast beneath your fingertips. A small workshop sits beside the house, its doorway darkened but welcoming. You step inside, and the familiar scent wraps around you. Sawdust, clay, fresh shavings, curling like tiny scrolls on the floor. The light drifting through the doorway lands gently across the workbench, illuminating your tools where they rest. Mallet, chisel, draw knife, the broad axe that shaped the earliest form of the beams. They lie arranged without intention, yet perfectly at ease, each one carrying traces of the day's quiet labour. You place a hand on the workbench and feel the uneven surface beneath your palm. Its edges are smooth from years of use, shaped not by careful sanding, but by the long, slow touch of hands that moved across it without thinking. Dust gathers in the grooves. Tiny stray shavings cling to the cracks. Everything about the bench tells a story, not in grand gestures, but in the small marks left by hours of unhurried work. You gather your tools one by one, wiping each blade with a small cloth that smells faintly of linseed oil. The cloth darkens as it lifts the day's traces from metal and wood. A quiet hum seems to settle in your hands as you work, a subtle echo of the rhythm that guided you earlier, the kind that lingers even after the task is done. Your fingers move automatically, smoothing handles, tightening a loose wedge, brushing away a stray thread of straw. You aren't in a rush. There is no schedule waiting. The tools deserve the same calm attention you gave the beams. As you tend to the broad axe, you run your thumb along the flat of its blade. The metal holds a faint warmth from the last cut it made, as though storing the energy for later. The handle, darkened from countless hours of gripping, fits your palm like an old friend settling beside you. You rest it gently on the bench and move to the smaller tools, aligning them with the care of someone arranging quiet companions. Outside, a breeze threads its way through the clearing, carrying a hint of cool dusk. It slips into the workshop and brushes across your cheek. The rafters above respond with a faint wooden murmur, the settling sound of beams adjusting to the change in temperature. The house itself makes a soft creak, barely audible but unmistakably alive. You pause in your movements and listen, feeling a small smile lift at the corners of your mouth. Even in stillness, the structure speaks in a language shaped by time. You step back out into the clearing, leaving the tools resting neatly in the workshop. The air feels more settled now, the colours deepening as shadows stretch across the ground. You walk toward the house and lay your hand on the threshold beam. The wood feels cool but steady, as though gathering its breath for the long night ahead. You sense, in some quiet, wordless way, that the frame understands the evening in a manner older than you can follow. Houses like this measure time differently, not by days or seasons, but by the slow, deliberate shifts that make them stronger. Inside, the dimness grows gently. The interior holds on to the last warmth from the afternoon, the air thicker and softer near the walls. You stand beneath the tie beam and tilt your head upward. The ceiling carries the faint musk of thatch, a smell that somehow feels both earthy and clean. The rafters show small variations in shadow, their edges curling inward like protective arms. A beam creaks softly overhead. Just one, just enough to remind you that temperature, weight and time are all met with quiet acceptance. You take a few steps through the room, letting your boots press lightly into the packed earth floor. The ground cools your feet through the soles of your boots, a grounding sensation that spreads slowly up your legs. You stop near the centre and look around. The walls, the beams, the braces, all of them seem to rest now, unburdened by the day's small adjustments. The clay on the wall has dried into a firm skin, faintly cracked in places, but content in its imperfections. You run your fingertip along one of the cracks, smoothing it lightly. The surface yields just a little, offering a small fragment of clay that sifts away like dust. You let it fall to the floor. The wall steadies again, its breathing quiet and subtle. These moments, you realise, happen whether or not anyone is here to notice them. The structure adapts, grows stronger, stretches into itself without waiting for instruction. Your presence helps, but it is not required for the house to know how to live. You sit on the bench near the wall, the wood warming beneath you. The house emits another faint sigh, this time from a brace near the roof. Perhaps the night air has pressed more firmly into the frame. Perhaps the beam is settling into a position it prefers. These sounds no longer surprise you. They feel like small gestures of acknowledgement, the way an old friend clears his throat to let you know he's still awake. You remain seated for a while, letting the calm settle into your shoulders. The house surrounds you with a quiet that is not empty but full of the day's lingering warmth, full of the memory of work, full of the centuries of knowledge held in every joint, every peg, every fibre of heartwood. You sense, without needing to articulate it, that these beams will continue long after you leave them. They will carry your marks, your decisions, your careful negotiations with grain and knot, but they will also continue without you, adjusting to each season, responding to each change, learning as they age. Eventually you rise and make your way toward the doorway. The light outside has faded into a soft, dusky blue. The first star hangs overhead, solitary but bright. A cool breeze gathers at the edge of the clearing, brushing against the grass and carrying with it the faint scent of damp soil. You linger a moment in the doorway, hand resting lightly on the frame. Your tools lie neatly inside the workshop. The beams stand silent in the cooling air. The thatch rustles softly above, catching the dark in its layered fibres. Everything feels settled, unhurried, patient. You take one last look at the house. It stands the way living things stand when they've learned their place in the world. Not rigidly, not stiffly, but with quiet certainty. The timbers hold their shapes with the calm of seasoned elders. The joints rest together with the intimacy of hands clasped around shared work. The structure carries the memory of the day's labour in its grain, yet prepares already for the long years ahead. You step away, boots pressing softly into the evening grass. As you walk from the clearing, the house breathes behind you. Timber stretching, straw rustling, clay cooling. It no longer needs your hands tonight. It will keep shaping itself in the hours to come, continuing the patient work of being a home. And as the path leads you toward the gathering dark, you feel the day's rhythm still pulsing in your palms. A quiet hum that will fade with time, long before the beams themselves ever do. The house remains, the wood remembers, and the craft continues on its own, long after your footsteps dissolve into the dusk. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.